Hi, it's Jenny with KOSI 101.1, and today's real funny friend is Chris Hardwick. You might know him because he was spoiler for a lot of the Talking Dead stuff. It's funny because I called my brother and I'm like, guess who's coming in? He goes, who? I'm like, Chris Hardwick. He goes, Talking Dead guy? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you probably get that a lot too because that was one of the first times I met you. And then, of course, or not met you, but learned of you. And then At Midnight, that was pretty fun too.
Oh, it was all fun. Yeah, both of those shows were really life-changing for me, and they really kind of satisfied different things, because Talking Dead was just very much, for me, it was sort of I was a fan of the Walking Dead comics, and we didn't do a show for the first season of Walking Dead. There were only 6 episodes.
Yeah.
But I just was so in love with the show, and then got the call to do, so for me, it was just like, it just satisfied this wonderful kind of nerd gene in me to talk about, this show that I love so much. And then At Midnight was really kind of my soul of like, making dumb jokes about the internet with friends of mine or people that I haven't met that I then would become friends with because they were so funny. And so it was just it was a blast. Like both those shows were just literal dreams come true.
And we were talking a little bit before, but so with Talking Dead, I get so frustrated. I'm like, he has to know because you tease us. You were so good at the tease. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to wait another week. But you said you didn't know. Like,
I didn't know. I would watch the episodes. Our show was live for the East Coast. So I guess that we were on at 7 o'clock West Coast time. So I would watch the episode at like 3 so that it was fresh in my mind. And honestly, there were 2 important reasons. Number one, I wanted my reactions to be real.
Yeah.
Like I wanted everything to be fresh in my mind. I wanted to really kind of watch along with the audience. That wasn't exactly possible because of, we had to get ready for our show, but it was pretty close. And the other thing was I was just terrified of spoiling something. I was so terrified. There were even times where like live on the air, I would have this crazy moment where I'm like, wait a minute, was this the comic or was this the show? So because they were different, they were the same, but they were parallel to each other.
Yeah.
But different traits would kind of jump to different characters and storylines and stuff. But yeah, there was one season early on where I was visiting the set. We were shooting some stuff down there, and I saw a major character was filming her death scene. Or his death scene.
Well, actually, do we still have to be spoiler?
It was Lori. It was Lori. By this point, if you haven't, and the pressure, so it was months before that episode aired.
Oh,
and I was absolutely terrified. And one of the wonderful things about that show is that the community of fans was so rad that people would just come up and we would we would immediately have something to talk about.
Even many years later, it's still interesting.
And I love talking about it. And so I felt I was so terrified that I was gonna let it slip because I'm not a good poker player, and so
I'm terrible at lying and I can't keep a secret.
So people always are like, "What's gonna happen? Who did this? What?" And I can safely say normally like I really don't know, but this is the one instance where I was like, "Oh, nothing."
Yes,
Lori's fine. I mean, I didn't say. Why wouldn't she be? So it was. That
would be really hard, especially because you're such a fan of the show. You're like, I really promise, I don't know.
And so for me, that just kind of simplified everything, and it allowed me to take the journey of the show, which I think obviously we binge watch a lot of stuff. Some things feel like some things we watch kind of feel like fast food. You just want to like gorge on them all at once. But I think part of the success of that show was the conversation around the show. This incredible fan community who had the time for the episodes to breathe and people to talk about it and anticipate it. And then we had this really fun appointment in television has even changed
because
since that show started.
Because if you're watching it by yourself, you're like, I can't be the only one that's freaking out about this because it was that show that would freak out every episode. You'd be like, oh my God. And then you'd have somebody, you're like the friend that got to talk with it.
Well, the reason why I thought that show would work was because, I was a huge fan of Lost. I mean, I've been a huge fan of a lot of shows, but Lost was really another one of those, like, and that show did a really good job of engaging the fans with this like kind of these sort of off show games where they would drop some fake commercial in between, and then you would go to a website and you would see these like cryptic videos and stuff. And so that was a show where things would happen and I would just call people and be like, why is there a polar bear? Or who is the smoke monster? You know? And so I needed to process things. So I really think, you know, I don't think every show needs an after show, but the shows that are, you know, there's a lot of dense character drama. There's a lot of characters. You know that a main character could go at any moment.
Yep.
Which I think The Walking Dead kind of helped establish that.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't the only show that did it, but I think it did help establish that. And so, you know, you just needed you know, some goofy dude to come on afterwards and be like, everything's fine.
It's all good.
You know?
See, the world's not.
Yeah, this person's alive. See, it's fine. This isn't a documentary.
Don't cry. Oh, and then I saw too, like, so you're doing stuff with Blumhouse. I'm a huge horror nerd.
Yeah.
Like I love horror movies, horror shows. Like that's my jam.
Yeah.
And so you're doing some stuff with Blumhouse. Is
Blumhouse,
that
yeah.
Blumhouse,
I was it's been in the talks forever. Yeah, Jason Blum, who's a super nice guy, was on my podcast forever ago, and we just really nerded out about, you know, obviously he makes a lot of the best horror movies. He's done a very good job. And he was like, why don't you? And I go, I've always wanted to direct something. He was like, why don't you do it? I'm like, oh, so he just sort of waved this magic wand. And then, but it's just, you know, directing to me is so overwhelming. I have so much respect for directors that I just constantly, you know, I pitched a handful of ideas, and the pandemic hit, and then a lot of the business changed.
Yeah.
But I just haven't settled on anything, and I've pitched them stuff before, but nothing recently. And then the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I don't know. As a director, you know, and so if you're a horror fan, you know that like there's a lot of very homemade stuff, which is part of the beauty and the charm of horror.
Yep.
And so even the films that you watch where you're like, oh, this one, you know, wasn't the best, I, as a fan, still love and appreciate the fact that a group of people got together and managed to commit something to film. My wife acts in a lot of horror movies, and so I see the process up close. And the more I've seen it, the more I'm like, I don't know if I'd be good at, you know, the director really has to have every answer.
Oh, yeah.
You have to have a plan, but you also have to be flexible enough, especially in low budget, to pivot when it's like, well, this is the only day we can shoot outside and it's raining.
Yeah.
Or this one actor got sick and this was the only day that we could shoot. So you have to get creative.
Yeah.
But I think that's also what is beneficial to the genre in a way, because, again, those kind of roadblocks sort of make people be creative.
But you also have like this love of the horror genre too.
Love it.
But like with the comedy, like those are my favorite ones.
Yeah.
Like I love the cheesy, campy. Like there's got to be something. There's always got to be a character. I always laugh and I'm like, if I'm in a horror movie, I'm going to be the best friend that's like the nerdy, like says all the weird, uncomfortable comments.
Yep.
Dies in the very end, but I'm like the reason that the main guy goes and kills the other girl.
You almost described my character in House of a Thousand Corpses, which was like the goofy, makes the snarky comments.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Just gets killed horribly. And that's not really a spoiler if you haven't seen it, because Rob Zombie's whole mantra with that movie is,
oh man,
everyone effing dies. Like that was on like that. I think that might have been part of the like the log line for the, where it's just like everyone dies.
Everyone dies.
Yeah.
Everyone. It was, oh my gosh, that was one that messed me up. Also, Hostel.
Sure.
Hostel is like, you'll have the reoccurring nightmares where like your friends are trapped in rooms. You're like, okay, well played. That was a good job.
And that was coming out of a period where you know, of horror where it just had it was like a reintroduction of gritty, you know, kind of 70s horror, you know, with guys like Rob or Eli or people like that kind of pulled the genre back in that direction. Now there's so many subgenres of horror. You can watch a streaming service like Shudder where you see it's like they meticulously categorize. And it's like, wow, horror is not, I think people, non-horror fans think it's all one thing, but it's the same as comedy. It's like, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a label that actually references all these subgenres of different types of
Because you can have
horror.
funny horror, you can have gory horror.
Now what they call elevated horror, which is, a lot of beautiful vistas, and you feel generally uncomfortable for 89 minutes, and in the last minute, you're like, Jesus, what just happened? It's like something horrendous happens that just like ties it all together.
That's the Babadook, like whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's like one of the best they say it. I'm like, all right, I was super bored for the most of it. And then the end, I'm like, oh, can't we just have the whole movie that last 20 minutes like that?
And then not only does that last 20 minutes like tie it all together in this kind of psychological horror, but then then you realize, this is actually what this whole movie was about.
Yeah.
Like it was about this whole other it was
and
about
that's
this
the
whole
best
other
part
thing.
is like the ending.
Or Midsommar, like any of these movies where it's just like where you're just watching going, something's weird and I don't feel it feels
I feel
weird.
uncomfortable. Mommy's not okay.
And then all of a sudden, people come out in bear costumes and murder somebody. And you're like, oh my God.
There it is.
Oh.
I knew it. I knew it. If only we could feel like that in real life.
Cliff. What the? Oh my God. Like it's just.
If only we had that in real life. Like that inner sense of like, something's not right here.
Something's not right. I don't know about this. This
I
is
got like a little
weird.
bit of IBS going on.
Oh my God. What bear? Why is someone wearing a bear head?
I can talk horror movies all day with you. I absolutely. This is why you're great at what you do.
Yeah, and honestly, like you would love my wife too because she's more of a horror fan than I am. Like she has a collection of. We collect a lot of memorabilia, like props. I just made a whole show about. A Disney auction that's on the CW called Up for Auction, and it follows this idea of like collectors sort of buying and caretaking.
So I'm not going to come and stay at your house.
Well,
is what you're saying.
Well,
it's all on display.
My wife has a lot of the horror movie props, and
that's awesome.
People would come over and mistakenly assume that they were mine. I'm like, no, those are Lydia's. She has original Gremlins, and she has the dummy from Dead Silence, and she has like stuff. Her favorite is Army of Darkness, so she's got.
Oh my gosh. The Necronomicon.
I got her. I got her the actual screen used Necronomicon from.
That's awesome.
Ash versus Evil Dead.
Oh yeah.
And so she's got his prosthetics from when he was Evil Ash. She's got other stuff. I've gotten her other stuff from that movie. So yeah. So we're a horror comedy family.
That's awesome. You have to have a little bit of both, right? Because you can't just be all horror or all comedy because.
Well, it's a nice balance. Like I have the horror movie props, and I have the comedy movie props. She has the horror movie props, and together we kind of collect Disney stuff. But we have this giant werewolf head.
There's Disney just
there's Disney stuff that just sort of like
that makes sense.
Just brings it up. It's the bridges the gap.
Remember that moment when you're saying something awkward and you feel like weird?
The Disney stuff.
Oh, the Disney stuff. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, but it kind of keeping with the theme. It's mostly Haunted Mansion.
Oh, okay, yeah, there we go.
So it's mostly Haunted Mansion stuff. But my wife has the actual werewolf head from The Howling, and we have it as a bust on display. And we were sort of like, and it's got this like it's in this kind of growly facial position, and
is it in the middle of your dining room table?
It's in our TV room, and so we have a 2-year. We have a daughter. She's 2, and so we were like, I don't know. Should we, do we keep it at? And the first time she saw it, she went woof woof, which is what she says when she sees a dog. Yeah. And she went up and pet it, and she booped its nose. Boop. She just went up and boop. So you have this like this werewolf head, and this adorable little kid who just goes up and goes boop. So it was fine. So she's either gonna love that stuff too, or she's gonna be like, oh, my parents and their stupid horror movies.
Well, that's that's how I grew up too. Like we'd watch. My dad didn't care. He was like, oh, you're watching this with me, whatever I'm watching, and then I became like I love them, and I don't get freaked out by most of them. I'm like, they're just
I'm
good.
surprised I became such a horror fan because when I was really young, I must have been like 7 or 8 years old. My parents happened to be out for Halloween, and so there was a babysitter, and HBO was relatively new. This was in the late 70s, and the 70s, old people talk. And HBO was relatively new, and Phantasm was on, and we watched it. And that movie, you want to talk about a movie the whole time, and you're like, this doesn't feel right. It's like they're in a mausoleum, and there's the flying silver ball that like drills into people's heads, and there's this weird interdimensional thing that's happening, and corpses, and that movie, I had nightmare. That movie really messed me up, and for some reason, like that didn't, like I still came back to. But again, growing up also in the 80s. There was, because of cable, was basically the lifeblood of low budget horror, because before, where else would a lot of those have had a home?
Monster Squad was like one of my favorites growing up. Oh my God. You kicked Wolfman in the nards.
Wolfman's got nards?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So you got the best stories. Chris Hardwick, he is going to be at the Comedy Works. Is it downtown?
Larimer Square.
Downtown Larimer Square all weekend long. All the best like ideas, stories, everything. I love that. So I could talk to you for hours on this.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
I'm a nerd.
I honestly, this has been such a fun conversation. I forgot that we were.
I know. I'm like, what are we here for? Oh yeah, we're just catching up over tea. It's
I
all
forgot
good.
this was all for but it's been an absolute pleasure to talk about this stuff, and and just a huge shout out and thanks to the horror fan community and the community of Walking Dead fans who really made it possible for me to have a job for 11 years.
Oh, absolutely. And you get to see him again. Comedy Works downtown. Go to comedyworks.com. Boop.
Perfect.